Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. We may step on a few toes through our examination of culture, art, politics, history, and identity. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
Circle. I'm John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native. I want to thank you for joining me. Again, trying to do this, reestablish doing this podcast once a week. Can't promise it'll always be every week, but I got another subject that I wanted to discuss this week. And of course, next week we head into Monday being Indigenous Peoples Day, and I always say that with a little bit of tongue in cheek because I always find these special days peculiar because they seem to miss opportunities. Let's just put it that way. But I'm not missing an opportunity. I'm going to be doing a 2-hour special show in Washington on WPFW in the morning of that of the 14th, and I will live stream that, and I may post it up as a again as a Let's Talk Native podcast as well, because it's not specifically a resistance radio program. But let me talk about what I want to talk about this week. So my grandson, in fact, two of my grandsons, they play football. They play football for Eden School on the modified program. But there's also a Little League football program where Eden has a team, and that's only my 7th grade grandson that plays on that team, and they play other schools. So Eden went out to Lancaster last week, and again, it's I've got some history out there. In fact, my wife jokingly said, "Oh, you can't go out to Lancaster; they hate you out there." And I said, "Look, they don't hate me out there. I mean, but to explain, almost 10 years ago, I was asked to be a part of a committee, a Native committee, that was invited in by the Lancaster Central School Board of Education to come in and explain the Native perspective. Now, look, there's been a statewide ban here for a couple of years, but 10 years ago, it was hit or miss. And Lancaster would make the news every time something happened on the NFL, the Washington NFL team's front, and Lancaster would get pulled in it because they had the same name. They're both called the Redskins, Lancaster Redskins, Washington Redskins. And I think at the time, the Washington football team was once again getting embroiled in a battle over the copyright rights to use a slur for a mascot. And and at the time, it wasn't going very well for the Washington NFL team. Turns out it kind of went away, but every time it would be national news with the Washington football team's name, it would become a local story here in Buffalo because Lancaster is a suburb of Buffalo. And Lancaster, as a school, and as far as the school board is concerned, they know this thing has been out there. And let's be clear. In 2020, I'm sorry, in 2000, I should say, 20 years ago, the Commissioner of Education, before this ban that just happened within this last couple of years, over 20 years ago, the commissioner at the time, a guy by the name of Richard Mills, he told schools, you got to get rid of this stuff, and you've got to phase them out. Many schools did, many schools didn't. In fact, some schools not only didn't phase it out, but they they doubled down on it. They actually made more and more use of their native mascot, including my old high school, Cambridge, which is a story you've heard me talk about before. But Lancaster was also one of those schools that had doubled down since the call by the commissioner in like I said, 2000. And but the current school board, or at least the current school board at the time, again, just about 10 years ago, they became more and more concerned. And in fact, they had already begun. And in fact, many schools started to phase these out. Not all of them. Some of them, like I said, double down. But some schools were already taking the nickname, the Redskins or Indian Savages, whatever, off of the jerseys, and they were trying to key in on the name of the school mostly. Um, so we get invited in, and we had a couple of workshop sessions with the school board. We had a couple of public meetings. There was even this community engagement session that was done. I had done some interviews on both television and radio. I had a really good write up in the Buffalo News. Um, so even though I was a part of the committee, I was kind of more out in the public eye than some of the others on the committee. And it's not to say that my work was any more important than theirs. I was just much more vocal about the issue. And this was really my first full court press engagement on the mascot issue. I had weighed in on it for years before that, and have had plenty to say over the years. But this was the first time that I was, first off, invited in, and then directly engaged at several levels, from the school board level to the community engagement level, and then in the media on the mascot issue. It was, again, it was my first time to be that much engaged in a specific battle in a specific school over a specific name. And it's like I told the school board in our one of our first meetings, your name is the worst. I mean, because it is not just a dictionary defined racial slur, but regardless of whether it was dictionary defined or not, it's a derogatory expression. I mean, it was never. I mean, you reduce somebody down to their skin and skin color, that starts to reek of N word right alongside our word. You know what I'm saying here? So, and this was a challenge that the Lancaster School Board had. And I got to tell you, I think they had 7 members on their school board. I think 4 of them were definitely wanting to get rid of it. I think 2 were indifferent, and 1 really needed some convincing. But between the work we did as a committee, excuse me, and then something surprising that happened. Um, the 3 of the school districts in the area here in Western New York that have a rather significant Native population or student body, and that's Akron, Niagara, Wheatfield, and Lakeshore. These 3 school districts out here in Western New York, led by their students, led by the Native students in particular, pushed for and got it approved through their school districts to boycott Lancaster. Now, this wasn't just about the name. This was about how these teams were treated when they competed at Lancaster, especially in Lancaster, because this wasn't just a school that had an offensive nickname and mascot. These kids would actually take racial swipes at the Native kids that they competed against. And let me be clear, Lancaster is white. And when I say white, I mean like 99% of the population in Lancaster. And you know, again, people realize that in Buffalo, Greater Buffalo, it is a very, very segregated city. I mean, there are the white sections, and then there are the black sections, and you know, the white folks really believe the black people need to know where they belong. I mean, that's kind of the thread that has been, you know, used over and over and over again, prior even to the shooting at the Tops Market in Buffalo. But so it's a very segregated city, and so what you have is some of these communities that are very, very white, and Lancaster's one of them. And the problem is that when you have a population that lacks diversity, that's just breeding ground for racism. That's just breeding ground for racial tropes to be developed, language, vernacular, you know, all that stuff, right? So that's what we were up against. Now, look, when you're dealing with a school board, you are dealing with educators or people who are committed to education. Especially, you know, you not just have the school board, you have the superintendent, and Lancaster had a very good superintendent at the time. So we went through this thing, and when the boycott happened, and then when we did this community engagement, and there's so many Native people from the other territories, not just from here Seneca territory, but all the other territories, showed up at that community engagement session because it was a public thing. It was clear that Native people were speaking in a unified voice. If there was any question, because we always get this, right? We always get this, well, this is just about woke liberals wanting to, to change things and that kind of stuff. And no, we weren't woke liberals. We were Native people saying, look, this stuff's got to stop. And again, this is almost 10 years ago. Almost 10 years ago. I mean, it was the summer of 2015 that Lancaster adopted a new nickname and mascot. So we were at the beginning of 2015, even the end of 2014. So, and after all of this is done, between the boycotts and the community engagement and the work that our committee and some of the work that I was doing with publicity and that kind of stuff, the school board voted unanimously to get rid of the mascot. They voted unanimously. Now, there were some really unhappy people in Lancaster, and trust me, we were threatened. I mean, there were some people. I mean, there was a Native woman who was pregnant at the time who got shoved at a school board meeting by a former cheerleader. Not exactly in cheerleading form, I might add, but a former cheerleader. And so this is how hostile Lancaster had gotten. In fact, two people ran for the school board with the intention that they would put two people on the board this time, and the next election put two more on, and then it would have enough to overturn the retirement. I mean, this was the plan. They even brought in, some token Native people, some of the what they call the Native American Guardian folks. These sellouts and frauds. They even brought a couple of people in from out of town, that were going to side with them. So they come into an area where there are Native people who live here, and they literally come into our homelands to side with the white folks. I mean, there's not much more you can say about that. But regardless, this is 10 years ago. Now, that's a long time ago. All the threats have kind of subsided, and and a lot of the stuff was pretty much, I thought, old news at this point. And of course, we also got a statewide ban since then. So I go out to Lancaster, and the Eden Raiders, and they're not Indian Raiders, they're not Red Raiders, but my grandson's team, the Eden Raiders, are playing the Lancaster Legends. So we show up there, and this isn't a school team. Again, this is like Little League, but it's 12-year-olds. It's 12 and 13-year-olds. So we go there, and they've got Legends logos everywhere. There was no signs of anything Redskin there. The cheerleaders were doing their Legends cheers. They were spelling out Legends, and look, and it looked to me, for all the world, like the transition was pretty smooth, and that these guys were happy with their new logo and happy with their new nickname, and and these football games are well attended, and there was they have an announcer, and they announced the Eden Raiders going against the Lancaster Legends, and everything sounded great. Our team was doing pretty well against their team. We had scored twice. It was 15-0. Lancaster was getting more and more frustrated, and you could see there, not just the sidelines, but some of the players. There started to be a few more, unsportsmanlike conduct flags. In fact, one of the coaches got ejected after he had two flags thrown at him, and it cost their team 30 yards. So sportsmanship was already starting to wane. I'm thinking, man, this is starting to feel a little bit like Lancaster of old here. But but at least it was just more of an arrogance, I guess. I didn't have any sense that there was any kind of racial bias going on here. I mean, look, Eden is predominantly white too. There's only one Native kid on the team. That's my grandson, and one of the cheerleaders was Native, or is Native. So there's only two Native kids there. So essentially, only two Native families there. Mine and the cheerleader's dad was there. So anyway, we're watching this game, and eventually Lancaster scored. So it was 15-6. That's the score. But they're growing frustrated because the clock is winding down. They're running out of time, and because they missed the extra point and we had scored extra points on both conversions, they were going to have to score twice to to win this game. So it was starting to look really doubtful they were going to pull it. And the frustration again was increasing. And it was at this period of time, and I think it was probably in the late in the third quarter. All of a sudden, I hear the coach, not the one that was ejected, but could have been more the defensive coach, I guess, beller out, Redskins, Redskins, Redskins. And this was obviously a defensive set that he was calling out to his team. And for me, I'm just sitting there like, really? I mean, 10 years after your own school board voted unanimously to retire this, you as a community and you as your Pee Wee football team, your Little League football team, you're still hanging on to these words? And not just hanging on to them, but bellowing them out. I mean, look, we're on opposite sides of the field. So when that coach is yelling this defensive set out to his team, it is broadcasting across the field right to where we all are. Now, I got to admit, I might have been the only one who heard it the first time, but it was as clear as day to me. And it bothered me. I mean, and I was annoyed by it because 10 years since we confronted this issue, and Lancaster had been confronting it for 10 years prior to that. 10 years after, since they essentially changed the name. 2 years after a statewide ban. And these coaches, who are probably old Lancaster athletes themselves, still probably a little pissed off that they had to change the name in the first place, are calling their defensive plays with this name. And they're screaming it out top of their lungs across the field for everybody. Now, and so not only do you have their team, and look, there's a series of teams. This was considered the varsity Pee Wee team. So, or junior team. These were the junior legends, as they called them. But there was already a younger team and, maybe even a younger team than that. I don't know how many age groups they had, and for all I know, they may use this defensive set with the same name on the varsity, on the JV and varsity modified teams. I don't know. But I do know that these 12-year-old kids playing for Lancaster were having this word, this racial slur, screamed at them. Now, I don't know what impact that has. I mean, all I know is that rather than that name being retired, and look, we understand the word is always going to exist, just like the N-word and other words still exist. We get all that. But there's something that you do by not using it. It's kind of like blackface, right? Blackface was a thing. I mean, it was a big thing for many years. There were white entertainers that, Al Jolson comes to mind. He was like the number one performer in the United States at one time, and he did all his performing in blackface. They don't do it anymore, but you still know that it happened. We know that there's bad parts of history, and there's history that for some didn't seem bad at all at the time, but because we at least think we become a little bit more aware with time, we change our behavior. So that's what retiring the native mascots is all about. I'm not going to get in and litigate the whole debate again. You know where I stand on that. You've heard my show before. But this is what I got to experience going to my 12-year-old's football game. So, and some of you know, because I wrote about it. I put a post up on Facebook, and and it got some pretty good reaction. But I wanted to explain it. I just wanted to explain what this is about because look, yes, many teams after the commissioner 20 years ago told them to change it, dropped the name. And for teams like Lancaster who dropped their name, almost 10 years ago, man, you would think it would just be a bug. I mean, none of these kids playing in this football game were in school when that school had this name. I mean, they're only 12 years old. They weren't even in school yet. So when they started school, even in elementary, in the Lancaster School District, the name was already changed. There was no residual by then, even for them. So who keeps it going? Well, individuals do. Some of these guys, and look, at some point it gets beyond their obsession with nostalgia and and their fond memories and their you know whatever they whether they peaked in high school or believe or are now alleged to have peaked in high school. It goes beyond all that. When you know that your name was the worst of all the mascot names, and that not only did your school do the right thing to get rid of it, but then sometime later there becomes a statewide ban against all of it, including and especially this name. And look, Lancaster wasn't the only school with this name. In fact, until that ban happened a couple of years ago, there were still, I think, at least two or three schools in New York State that still carried that same name. They were pretty much burying it, but it was still there. So, I mean, we push for this thing, and again, I sometimes I don't complain about it because the fact that this statewide ban happened is a good thing, and there were a lot of things that built up to this statewide ban, but the work to make it happen specifically was primarily carried by me as a Native person and the families that I worked with in the town where my old high school was, Cambridge, New York. We pushed this issue up to the New York State Department of Education, and then once she ruled against my old school, who had retired it and then unretired their Indians mascot, then I started putting a full court press on the current commissioner, Dr. Betty Rosa. I said, look, now you got to ban them all. You got to finish what Richard Mills started 20 years ago. If you have the power to tell one school to get rid of it, you have the power to tell them all to get rid of it. I didn't know, but that was her strategy all along as well. We had a conversation about it, so I know it was her strategy. She told me she needed a school like Cambridge to mishandle the idea of retiring the mascot. And it's like I told her too. You had tools today that Richard Mills didn't have 20 years ago. You have the Dignity for All Students Act, which is an anti-discrimination law on the books. You had this push for diversity, equity, inclusion, which is, again, an anti-bullying, anti-discrimination policy that was being pushed by the Board of Regents. So you had things that Richard Mills didn't have 20 years ago. Yeah, and this was also part of the issue that was being pushed on with Lancaster. But again, with Lancaster, we had a broad effort to make that school change. We had folks from Tonawanda, from Tuscarora, and from Seneca Nation all involved in that debate, including the kids with their boycotts. So we really did have a really good effort against Lancaster. And I used Lancaster and some of what had happened with the Washington football team and the Cleveland baseball team and other. I used that momentum as I was pushing this issue at the state level. But the thing is, you still have people resisting. I mean, there's still, I think, at least 3, maybe it's 4 schools in Long Island that are trying to fight this. And so they're fighting this, as hard as they can. I think they're trying to take it to federal court. And they're going to lose. But it just kind of gives you the idea of how much money some of these people are willing to spend on this thing. And speaking of money, I got to tell you, it came to my attention that not only is the Lancaster Junior Legends still using this word in their training, the bank account for this Little League football team is still called Redskins Junior. Redskins Junior Football Lancaster. And how do I know this? Because look, I had somebody who got a hold of me and said, look, when I paid for my food at the concessions at this game, this is how it shows up in my bank statement. This is how it shows up on my charge card. Redskins football, Redskins Junior Football. I mean, so even the banks have failed to step up and say, you know what, we're not crazy about that name. I mean, we know that they had to change the mascot. Don't you think you should probably think about changing the name? Because it's literally, this is showing up on everybody's bank statement. If you buy a hot dog at the concession with a charge card, there it is. And you got to think, why do I have a Redskins charge on my card? What am I supporting here? And that's literally what this person who reached out to me said. What am I supporting here? So, I bring this up for a couple of reasons. One is, there always needs to be a continuing update of the information associated with any of these battles. And look, and you know that I've talked plenty, and I'll continue to talk about the residential schools slash boarding schools. I'm going to talk about the Seneca gaming revenue. I'm going to talk about some of these issues that affect me because where I live, and and because of just simply by being native. The mascot issue is still an issue that's important to me, but it's important to me for a couple of reasons. One is because it's been there are not a whole lot of fights that we have where the success is as clear as it is in this situation. So yes, we got Lancaster to change the name almost 10 years ago, and we got a statewide ban. I mean, we don't win these kind of battles like this very often. That's not the way things go. I mean, we're still fighting taxation, we're still fighting gaming regulations, and we're still fighting any number of things. We saw this pitiful report that came from the Interior Department on residential schools, which was a travesty all by itself. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of issues. Missing and murdered Indigenous women. I mean, we don't have residential schools, but there still is a bit of a CPS or Child Protective Services issue problem that we have. Everybody thinks, oh, yeah, we have ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act. But you know what? We still don't have control over the removal and placement of children from unsafe environments to safe environments. That's still being run by the states or by the counties, really. There's federal guidelines that say, well, you got to put a priority on native placement. But these are the challenges. We still have laws on the books that are clear authoritarian rule. We've got the doctrine of Christian discovery, which is still codified in U.S. law. That led to the trust doctrine, which really casts us as wards of the state. Still to this day, we still have Native people all over the country saying, well, United States has a trust responsibility to us, not even understanding what the hell they're saying. So we have battles ahead. We know that trust doctrine turned into what they call the plenary powers doctrine, where Congress has unfettered access and unlimited authority to make laws about us without us. That's how we end up with the gaming law that's on the books. That's how the Congress makes all these rulings. They literally declared that we were U.S. citizens without our permission, without our request. These are the kinds of things that have happened and continue to happen because this is the body of law that still exists today. So, yeah, when people say, well, why are you bothering fighting a mascot issue? Well, I'll tell you why. Because those kids become the bureaucrats. Those 12-year-old kids that are having Redskins barked to them by their coach, their respected elder, are going to be adults one day. And they're not going to think there's anything wrong with the word. How could there be? It was one of our defensive sets. It's just a word. It doesn't even have much meaning. Well, if you don't know where the word comes from, and if you don't know what it references, and how it was used in a hateful and hurtful way for centuries, I mean, that word usually had something like dirty or stinking or some other derogatory word put in front of it when it was talking about us. Murderous. I mean, it's funny because I have a T-shirt, and if you see my profile on Facebook, my profile pic has me wearing this shirt that says "Merciless Indian Savages," and it says right below it, "Declaration of Independence," because that's where the expression comes from. That's the way we were referred to by Americans, by U.S. citizens, by those founding fathers. Thomas Jefferson wrote that in the Declaration of Independence. So when we take a bit of an affront to to not only being called those names, but then to have our existence mocked by white kids calling themselves Redskins or Indians or savages. The whole idea of playing dress up as Indians while Native kids were being ripped from their homes and sent to residential schools, yeah, that's an issue. It's an issue that I take offense to. And that's why I speak out about this stuff, because it does matter. Because again, those kids are going to be adults. My grandkids are going to have to take up this fight because it's not going to be over. I mean, we're not in a post-racial democracy in the United States. I mean, that's a bunch of BS. We see it all the time. We see the hate being spun by Donald Trump. I'm not a big fan of Kamala Harris, but the fact that he's making issue with her ethnicity or her race, Indian from India that is, and black. I mean, it's bizarre because we're still here. Didn't matter that the mascot got taken away. They're still using the word. And they're using it with kids. They're influencing children with the use of this word. Now, I don't know what my next steps are. Look, I made a public statement about the whole thing. I've raised the issue. Don't know if I take it up with this Little League football league. I don't know if I do that or not. But here's the thing. Even though I may have been the only one that heard it, and they did it like 3 times through the game, called out this defensive set 3 times. Even though I may have been the only one who heard it and had the hair stand up in the back of my neck when I did hear it, it doesn't matter. The fact is that those kids are hearing it because they're taking instruction with that word. But what do I do about it? Do I let it go? You listen to my show. You know I don't let a whole lot go. So no, that's why I'm doing this program. I wanted you to know that almost 10 years after Lancaster, one of the whitest suburbs of Western New York, did the right thing by getting rid of their mascot without being ordered to by the Department of Education, you still have people in that community pissed off about it. And that's the only reason for continuing to use the word this way is belligerence. It's obstinance. It's their way of protesting. I've mentioned it before, but I'm going to tell you. White supremacy is a fallacy. It's a lie. White people aren't supreme. But here's what white folks did. They treated other people so badly, and they created a dynamic between white people and everybody else that gave them more power. Even as they spun words like democracy or, all men are created equal and life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness and justice, and justice for all. They didn't mean it. They meant for them. And they created systems. What people don't understand about the word racism, it isn't about a racial bias. I don't think race isn't even a thing. It's a man-made construct. But racism is real because if you purport that because of your skin color, or your national origin, you come from Europe, so you're a white person from Europe, that you are superior to others, especially people who have darker skin than you, if you reduce it down to some sort of genetic superiority, that's what racism is. Racism isn't about bias. It isn't about my group not liking your group. It is about my group saying, I am better than you genetically. You are inferior to me, and I'm going to create tools, and I'm going to create policies, and I'm going to create systems that will ensure that my superiority becomes a reality. Because I'm not really superior, but I'm going to create this, and I'm going to create a privilege. So this is where white supremacy becomes white privilege. Because white supremacy isn't real. But white privilege is what you do when you have the power to create a system that benefits one group of people. But you know what happens to white supremacy when it builds this privilege and that privilege gets challenged? That privilege becomes fragility. I always talk about this flow of white supremacy to white privilege to white fragility. The fact that you've got a couple of coaches that are going to stomp their feet and still beller out that word, that's their fragility showing through. It's not their power. Yeah, they've got support in that community to make that. It's because they're all feeling fragile. Why do they feel fragile? Because they feel like they had something taken from them. They feel like their privilege is under fire. All of this stuff that you hear Donald Trump or other people talk about, the American way being degraded, they're talking about white fragility. That's all they're talking about. They're talking about losing something. And who are they losing it to? Immigrants? No, no. They're talking about losing something that was specifically white. They're losing the advantage of whiteness. I mean, that's what the mascot battle is all about. It's about doing something about white privilege. And what the reaction you get from that, it could not be more clearly white fragility. But here's my message. Here's my message to white folks. You're gonna be okay. It's all right. You're not really gonna lose freedom. You might lose some privilege. But you can earn that privilege through your actions. See, that's what most people say. Oh, I don't have white privilege. I worked hard every day of my life. So you were able to have a job, huh? You were able to have a home. You were able to have things that others were denied. Your salary's higher. Yeah, there's male privilege too. So it isn't just about white privilege. There's male privilege too. So if you're a white male, you're double bonused. But some of that privilege is going to go away because the rest of us aren't going to stand for it. We're not going to allow you to mock us. We're not going to allow you to have an advantage over us simply because of your skin color. You don't work harder than me. You're not more intelligent or superior in any way over me, nor am I over you. This is the lie. But if you think that because Donald Trump is a rich white man or Joe Biden is a rich white man, that you're entitled to something because the leaders are white, well, then we got a problem here. And that problem is going to, if you dig in on this stuff and you protest too much, that's when you're going to realize that you've become so emotionally invested in white privilege that the loss is going to seem greater. Let it go. Get over it. Start seeing us all as equals. I mean, it's really that simple. It's not a reflection on you being inferior. It's the fact is that we aren't. So, look, maybe in another 10 years, Lancaster will finally have retired that word. They haven't yet. And it's sad. It's sad. And, these schools in Long Island fighting the mascot ban, maybe eventually somebody says, wait a second, you're spending taxpayer dollars doing what? I mean, you should have been concerned that taxpayer dollars were making these images and these symbols and these words and these names ubiquitous. I mean, that you put it on your artificial turf, you put it on your chairs and your banners and your signs and your uniforms. Cambridge Central School even had the logo and the name on the cafeteria staff when this change happened. I mean, it wasn't like that when I was in school. I mean, that's where I went to school. And the logo and the mascot were kind of like incidental. Yes, they were the Cambridge Indians. But it wasn't in your face every freaking place. Every folding chair in Cambridge had had their logo on it when I went out there. So you had schools again that didn't just reject the call from Richard Mills 20 years ago. They doubled down. They spent thousands. They spent taxpayer dollars, lighted signs, artificial turf, murals, the gym floors being painted. Just an insane amount of race-based imagery that wasn't their race to begin with, if you even believe in the whole race thing. So this is where we're at. I want to thank you for listening to the program. It's this was kind of a stroll backwards, I'm afraid, but that's kind of what we got. So I want to thank you for listening. Um, Stay tuned for my Resistance Radio show this Thursday and Friday, and look for me to do a special broadcast on Monday, Indigenous Peoples Day. I want to thank you for listening. I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance. I'm sorry, this is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.